Welcome to Click for IB Biology. Here we're looking at natural selection, and in this particular video we'll be studying what is known as selective breeding, otherwise known as artificial selection, which is the method used in the production of plants and animals for agricultural purposes. There's a blank version of this presentation, a PDF, is linked into the description below, and there you'll also find 10 questions to check your understanding, and the answers are there as well to secure your understanding of the content of this particular part of the syllabus. Selective breeding, or sometimes known as artificial selection, is the process in which we bring about the domestication of wild animals and plants for human use. The process lies at the heart of human civilization, and its origins are in the area of around about 12,000 years before present. And there are a number of centers around the world which each in their own way developed these processes, these practices of selective breeding. Perhaps the better ones are here in the Southwest Asian area. This is known as the Fertile Crescent, focused around river systems such as the Euphrates and so forth. This is the same location as modern-day Iran and Iraq and Syria. So that was the part of the world in which the wheat cultures were developed, while simultaneously to the east we had in China another agricultural region, the development of early farming, and these were the beginning of the agrarian societies here based on rice. There, in North America, South America, there are also centers over here in particularly in Mexico, which would have been based on maize. So these developmental centers were using the process of artificial selection, selective breeding, to turn wild plants and animals into domestic usage. And this is dated to around about 12,000 years ago, years before present. Let's take a look at how this operates. So we have two examples, one of crop breeding and another of animal breeding, to illustrate that. And here we're going to be looking at the development of maize, of wheat. And so here we see wheat growing, and these grains here, these are the seeds of the wheat grass, and these of course contain starch and a lesser amount of protein. And the idea is to select wild types of plant here and breed these in a manner so that they end up with a large number of seeds on each of the plants. In that way we become more efficient in our production of food. And so the reasoned method for this is that the ancestral plants would have been growing in the wild, and they would have shown genetic variation just like other sexually reproducing species do, and the variation here is the number of seeds which are found on the wild growing plants. And the idea would be, of course, that we would select this one and this one, and they would be used as a food source. But this plant here, these seeds would be taken and planted, and the idea is that they would germinate to produce plants with the same genotype. And notice that these ones here have more seeds than the other ones, so it's kind of like a distribution model here of a few seeds, many seeds, and we're selectively selecting these ones in directional selection in order to achieve a greater yield of seeds with their food content. So when we have grown these will also do sexual reproduction through their flowering mechanisms and random fertilization, and show again the distribution of the characteristics, but now our characteristic has moved. The mean previously is in this area here, there perhaps. The mean has now shifted to the right, but will still show variation. But notice that the number of seeds has increased. And once more, we would perhaps use this as our food source, but these ones would be selective, and those seeds would be planted because genetically they are producing more, genotypically they are producing more seeds, and we would use those as our breeding population. So again, we're going to select this part of the population here, and through directive selectioning we would then plant and grow those again, and the process carries on. Again, we would then select these as our seeds for future breeding. Of course, as the number of seeds increases on the stand of wheat, in this case the plant would be wheat from the southwestern Asian regions, the problem is that the stems of the plant then are unable to support the actual large number of seeds, and so now we're going to select for a different characteristic of a shorter stem and a more robust stem to support the increasing number of seeds. And so in this way, different characteristics are progressively developed over time, and of course the time period we're dealing with is 12,000 years, in order to produce the modern variants on wheat plants. Although technically things have changed in the modes and methods in which this is done with plants, the principles still remain in contemporary modern breeding of plants. Let's look at an animal method of domestication. We're going to take wild cows, and we note from wild cows, here's an example of a wild cow from the particular region that I'm in, and if you look at this animal, this wild cow, there's no noticeable structures associated, the udders, that we would recognize in the domesticated cattle that we see here. And that's because their milk production is generally quite low. They're only supporting the feeding of their calf, and then probably only one. So I'm suggesting here that these numbers here represent litres of milk which are available on a daily basis. And in our ancient cow we have 0.5, 0.75 and 1 litre of milk. So of course we're going to use that as our dairy product, and this will be selected. The cows which are capable of producing the high litre, we're going to use those cows in order to breed and form the next generation of cows here. So we're not selecting the milk, of course, we're actually selecting the cow itself to be our breeding animals. Now, having done so, this of course is another example of continuous variation in milk production, and we're selecting the animals capable of high milk production to form our next generation. Now, since those genes here, these alleles here, are capable of greater milk production, we would expect the mean milk production to shift. So it would shift to the right, and we can see that in the values that I'm proposing here. So once more, the cows producing higher litres of milk per day are now selective. So this again is directional selection, and they will be used as the breeding population to create the next generation of cows, and then we have our increased milk production, and the process simply carries on until you end up going from wild animals that look like this to the modern agricultural animals that have phenotypically look like this, with a greatly exaggerated milk production seen on these cows. The amount of milk production from a domesticated cow is far greater than is necessary to support any calf, and of course we draw this off as our milk supply for the dairy industry. And then the interesting thing about this is that with these exaggerated features, these animals would have a poor ability to survive in the wild like these animals, because of the encumbrance of these structures are very unnatural. And so in this way, notice the role of directive selection in enhancing characteristics through the selection of characteristics. This process of accelerating over what has been essentially a 12,000 year period was not unnoticed by Darwin. Darwin himself was a keen observer of farming. He he bred pigeons, and this was an inspiration to Darwin, certainly part of the inspiration for the creation of his mechanism of natural selection. So Darwin, at the beginning of chapter 4 of The Origin of Species, asks the question, if we see this in artificial farming, selective breeding, is there a natural version of this? And of course, there is indeed, which is the natural selection mechanism of natural populations. And so that brings us to the end of our study of natural selection, and it would now be appropriate to progress to the study of the evolutionary topics on the syllabus. Links to those evolutionary topics are now appearing in front of you, a link to the channel so you can subscribe, and a link back to all the playlist on natural selection videos.